Ever since when I was young, I loved Superman. And the reason for it is not what you think it is. Because although its agility, his superhuman strength, and his intellect all fascinated me and was incredibly fun to think about, the real reason why I was so captivated and fascinated with Superman was because of where he got his energy from. He didn't get it from a radioactive spider like Spider-Man. He wasn't born as a Norse god like Thor or Loki, but he got it from the yellow sun above us. And that fascinated me like nothing else. Because energy shapes everything around us. For instance, the PowerPoint that I'm sharing on the presenter right now, the clothes that you're wearing, the shoes that you're wearing, the lights that are shining down on all of us. It is not an underestimation to say that energy is a prerequisite for a dignified living in the 21st century. But how we think about energy, how we distribute it, how we produce it, has massively changed from the 21st century, from all the way back to a few years ago. We started out from the fires from the prehistoric ages, and ever since the Industrial Revolution, we started using fossil fuels. The problems with fossil fuels, though, is quite immense. The most obvious one is environmental degradation. There's pollution, there's fog, and most imminent of all, there's climate change, which has gone to a point of irreversibility according to some studies. So humanity began to look outward. No, we began to look upward. And we realized if we want abundant and clean energy, maybe we should go straight to the source. That source is the stars. And the closest way to it is nuclear fusion. Hi, my name is Chung, and I'm a rising junior in Seoul International School. And today I want to talk about an issue that, well, I personally believe, at least in the technological sector, fits closest to today's TEDx theme, which is the edge of possibility. Well, a lot of you right now are probably confused right now. You're probably befuddled. Like this random guy came up to the stage and talked about Thor, Loki, and Spider-Man and talked about how the sun is so important. What the hell is nuclear fusion, right? Well, let me clear it up for you. In simple terms, fusion is when you light two atomic nuclei, usually forms as hydrogen in stars, and combine it to form a heavier nucleus. And when this happens, a small amount of mass is converted directly into energy. A lot of energy. And this is because when nuclear fusion happens, you end up with a lighter mass than when you started. And the reason why this is so important is because the law of conservation of mass states that mass isn't destroyed nor created, it's just shifted around. So where does this mass go? Well, it goes into energy. And nuclear fusion is basically the concept of using this massive energy generation to power our lights, our presenters, to make our clothes, etc. In the sun, as I previously talked about, gravity is what pushes helium and neutron to make this. And it is not probably in the sun because there's so much abundant nuclei and there's so much abundant elements to push this nuclear fusion reaction. But this is not the same for Earth. In Earth, we need nuclear fusion because we don't have the same amount of mass and gravity as the sun, and what scientists came up with is nuclear fusion. This massive energy output, to prove it, is the reason why we can feel the heat on our skin from the sun, even though it is billions of miles away. So, obviously, scientists' first reaction was, hey, let's do this, but on Earth. And even though this sounds pretty ridiculous, it has actually worked. And building a star on a box on our pale blue dot named Earth is actually working. So, but before that, let's clear up a few definitions about nuclear energy, because there's main two things about them. Firstly is that nuclear energy gets a bad reputation, because whenever people think about nuclear energy, they think of nukes, they think of Chernobyl, they think of Hiroshima. And while all these are real catastrophic events that we should feel tragedy for, this is not the true nature of nuclear power. All these events happen because of human negligence and misunderstanding about nuclear energy. Now that we have them, even if a nuclear meltdown does happen, it is exponentially much more safe insofar as the nuclear reaction and the meltdown happens within the nuclear reactor itself. Secondly though, fusion is not fission. So it is not Hiroshima, it is not Chernobyl. Fission is when you explode uranium and neutron together to form and split up atoms, and that makes energy. Fusion is heating up those atoms, mainly deuterium and tritium, to make them to a solid energy that produces more mass and therefore more energy. Now that we have these separation clear, let's talk about the fuel supply. Because the most important part about energy is, where does the energy come from? Well, fossil fuels comes from fossil fuels in the ground, and solar, wind, and wind come from the environmental factors all around us. So do we even have enough fuel, and is the fuel sustainable and is able to be reproduced for a lengthy, long time? Well, the answer is yes. Because firstly, the main two components, the first of them being deuterium, is found in seawater. And we have a lot of seawater. And we have even a small liter of seawater is enough to power a small city using nuclear fission for hours. The second part is tritium, and even though tritium is really, really rare, it can be bred from the cycle of nuclear fusion itself. So it can be reproduced by nuclear fusion. So as I talk about this, you're probably wondering, fusion emits no greenhouse gases, it produces no long-term radioactive waste like fission, there's no risk of a chain reaction or a nuclear meltdown like fission, and the fuel is either abundant or is able to be reproduced anyways. So in short, in theory, it's the closest thing to a perfect energy source that we have ever imagined. Well, here's the catch though. We're trying to replicate this on this. It's not as easy as it sounds, because fusion only occurs at temperatures of over 100 million degrees Celsius. At that point, matter becomes plasma, which is basically just a hot charged soup of particles. And plasma is unpredictable and impossible to contain using any solid material known right now. So how did scientists attempt to contain it? The leading method is called magnetic confinement. And basically, in layman terms, there's a really strong magnet in the middle, and the plasma is suspended over it, making sure that it doesn't touch any solid objects. And scientists create a strong magnetic field shaped like a donut to suspend this plasma, and this is called a tokamak. But obviously, stabilizing plasma for more than a few seconds has been incredibly difficult. Despite this, however, we've actually made fusion happen many, many times. But we haven't figured out how to make it practical yet. For instance, even though if fusion may work in theory, we don't know how to get more energy from it than the energy that we put into it. And scientists call this process ignition. Otherwise, if there is no ignition, or in other words, you need to put more energy than the energy you put out, then nuclear fusion is just an experiment. There's no practical use to it. But here's the turning point. In 2021, the JET facility in the UK set a new world record for sustained fusion energy, which is over 5 seconds of continuous output. And that energy alone is able to power a city for hours and even days. And in 2022, the National Ignition Facility in California made history. For the first time ever, fusion reaction released ignition. As in, more energy was produced than was to power it. This is massive because, as I talked about before, this proves that fusion can be used for an efficient energy source. It is not just an energy source used as an experiment. So not only are all these breakthroughs happening, more and more support is growing. This is the ITER, the largest fusion project in the world, and it's also known as the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactors. It's a collaboration of 35 different countries. And to be frank, there's not a lot of things in the world that 35 countries can reach consensus on, and one of them is nuclear fusion. I think that points out and speaks to the truth about how nuclear fission is imminent and is able to be produced and is able to have the incentive of garnering many different countries' attention towards it for funding. Beyond governments though, the private sector is also stepping in. Companies like Helion Energy, TAE Tech, Commonwealth Fusion Systems are all investing towards nuclear fusion. And to conclusively sum up, what we're witnessing right now is a global effort. scientists, corporations, companies all around the world are coming together to achieve nuclear fusion. And this speaks to the truth about how nuclear fusion is important. So, hold on though. Why does fusion even matter? Why do we care so much about it? If it is this laborious to get fusion in the first place, why not pursue another energy source? Well, I like to think of it this way. I think that energy is an invisible infrastructure of life. Nothing works without it. My TED Talk wouldn't work without it. Clean water, food production, making clothes, the internet, schools wouldn't work without energy. But secondly, I think the more theoretical or the more principled approach to think about this is that fusion could free us from fossil fuels. And freeing us from fossil fuels means that it ends our dependence on dirty energy, on oil pipelines, and perhaps most significantly of all, geopolitical struggles surrounding energy and oil sources. Environmentally and geopolitically, the benefits are enormous for fusion. Obviously, there's politics. Obviously, this is not going to be hard. The general reaction behind anything nuclear is rooted behind the perception that this is going to blow up. It's going to lead to another Hiroshima, Chernobyl, or etc., etc. But I like to persuade your mind and expand your horizons a bit. Because if we consider the safety of nuclear fission, no waste, and generally a safe breakdown, and even if it does happen, we think that even if it is hard to get public trust, this is worth investing in. But the most theoretical part about it is that it's not about reducing harm. It's about unlocking new grounds. Because when the Wright brothers released their airplane, nobody expected that we'll be flying commercial airplanes, building jets, and using jets to fight in wars out of all, to use them in combat, etc. I think that human progress has to have some kind of innovation to back up to it, and I think nuclear fission is a perfect example of that. With power comes through many practical benefits like desalination, vaccine refrigeration, education, even food security. But I think there's principal aspects as to why we should consider fusion as an efficient energy source. Cross-legged, sitting on the floor, flipping through comic books. I remember staring at superheroes who could harness infinite energy with their minds or hands, but it felt like magic back then. But today, right now, as I conclude this TED Talk, it feels different. Because we're not just imagining the powers of the stars, we're building it in real life. We've seen it from the pictures that I'll show you. Real machines creating real fusion, and tiny suns held in place by tiny magnets, giving off light and heat. Of course, it's not perfect yet, but the important thing is that it's tangible, it's real, and it's able to be produced. We are at a turning point. For decades, fusion was a dream. It doesn't have to be. The challenge ahead is still big, as I mentioned. We need sustained funding, we need global cooperation, we need patience. But the progress is real and the vision is clear. And here's the truth. If we get this right, if we do unlock fusion energy for the future, we unlock a different kind of future. One where clean energy isn't a luxury. One where a child growing up in a rural village has the same access to power as someone in New York or London. That's the world I want to live in. That's the world I believe we can build. Not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. The powers of the stars is within reach, and this time, we don't need to be superheroes or read comics to be in it. We just need to keep going. Thank you.